When you really think about it, video games are straight sorcery. Show PS5 to a civilian in the 1500s and he'll just spontaneously combust. So how is it made? This is Tennis for Two, known to the general public as the first video game ever. The programming is actually quite simple. No, it's not, I'm lying, but let's break it down. Before the days of physics engines, the game was made by a bunch of geeks simulating trajectories with the help of the government research institution's Dani Model 30 analog computer. The analog computer is voltage between plus or minus 10 volts for X and 0 to 40 volts for Y volts. 160 kHz, 300 millivolts, how much cosine sine, then added to the X and Y voltage with the correct circle on the screen. It's a circle. The X movement is linear. It goes like this, which should be very, very simple, but somehow looks like this.
Oh my god! What is that?
Now, I'm not going to pretend I know what all of this means, but in simple, it's controlling speed direction and air resistance using a nice trick called voltages, current, capacitors, and resistors. But now you may ask, how is this air resistance even calculated? And the MIT developers were on demon time and figured out the solution, and they used something called an integrator. The feedback between the input and output of the first integrator is what calculates this factor of air resistance, causing the ball to lose energy over time. Now you may ask, what is an integrator? It basically just controls the time integral of its input signal. You following? Cool. Same for simulating Y movement, using something I do know, a quadratic graph, using said integrators to create this parabola. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now the first gravity system ever. I repeat, the first gravity system ever. See how complicated this was? This is why many games after this choose just to not include a gravity system, such as the very popular game Space Invaders, which introduced enemy AI. Yes, this is enemy AI. From this, the gaming industry began to develop with the refinement of these types of game consoles using these arcade thingy-majigs. But it wasn't until the Magnavox Odyssey until they replaced the transistor to transistor logic with programmable microprocessors that we all know today, ending all of this thank God! Breaking news, you no longer have to make this big box of magic to create your own games. Say no more. Activision were a group of developers who left Atari to make their first ever third-party game developing studio. They could do this because of the invention of cartridges, which were being used to actually hold the game instead of internally onto devices. After this, the snowball kept on rolling with more console makers and more third-party developers. But this still leaves us with one problem. Little John here is fascinated with his own video games and how they are made, and decides that he wants to make their own. But Little John is only 12. He needs to make his own physics system, graphics engine, collider system, input system, sound engine, Windows system management. All this gets a bit too much for John, until he discovers this thing called a game engine. In very simple terms, a game engine acts as the building blocks, having very basic concepts, so Little John doesn't die when trying to make these games. All companies use these. Some make their own, some use public and existing ones, such as Unity and Unreal Engine, such as Nintendo using a plethora of in-house game engines for their games, or Innerswell who uses just Unity for their games. But don't get it twisted, it is still very much possible to render things inside using bare bones code, or pulling shader code from random libraries, shown by DayDH when he made Minecraft from scratch with no game engine, which I found pretty impressive. Unreal Engine marked the shift between AAA companies to indie companies being the majority, and basically everyone knows of its existence, because of how beautiful these games can actually be. Like now it's even used for movies, like look at this. But there is still one more question.
Another one.
How do the graphics even work? Well, the answer is just a lot of complex math and a shit ton of triangles. In Tennis for Two, we know that the circle is made by this equation, to calculate the positions and output on the screen using cathode ray tubes. Now this is easy, it's just a couple lines. This eventually developed into sprites, and now we use much thicker and beefier machines to process this. But what about 3D models? Well, take this 3D area, maybe 3 different shapes. But alas, it's all triangles, because triangles make up all shapes in 3D renderings. Why triangles, you ask? Because they are the simplest shape that make up literally every other shape. They can be squares, but remember, squares are just 2 triangles. The way the GPU shows this is by finding the coordinates of every single vertex of every single triangle and then playing a really intense game of connect the dots. The reason you won't be able to see the triangles the next time you boot up a game of Fortnite is because there are simply too many of them. And if your GP isn't good enough to do all of this math, then this happens. My PC! But now look again. This scene doesn't just have shapes, it has light. Well, it's not really light, because in video games, light is fake. There really is no light in this scene, just shadows. But now you may ask, how can there be shadows with no light? Well, like this. Each triangle that makes up these shapes are individually colored to be darker or lighter independent of where it's facing in relation to the light source, thus making it appear more realistic. This was originally shown in Mario 64 by Nintendo. At that time, it was revolutionary. Of course, all of this is handled by the GPU. But as GPUs got even more power, we realized that we could do even more math to make even more realistic lighting, leading to the invention of ray tracing. This is the process of simulating every single light ray, making it appear just like real life, making this light no longer fake. If you want a more in-depth analysis on this, I highly recommend watching this video. But in simple, it's all just math.